Now, 3 health unions representing up to 45,000 health workers in England have suspended a series of strikes after a government offer of talks on pay.
So the next walkout, which would have been including ambulance workers from both GMB and Unison, was due to happen on Monday. It comes as the Welsh Ambulance Service has also agreed to suspend action for further talks.
Well, we're joined now by Sara Gorton, who's Head of Health at Unison. Good morning, Sarah. How optimistic are you about these talks then going ahead?
Well, we're proceeding with extreme caution. So, as you say, around 32,000 Unison members were due to take strike action next week from ambulance organisations, but also from a range of hospital trusts and in the National Blood Service. And they are tentatively willing to pause those strikes in order to enter talks. The big difference that we've seen this week, the sudden change from government, is a willingness to talk not only about pay for next year, but about topping up pay for this current pay year. Yes, in the form of a one-off lump sum. And there's been a concession from government, a significant movement from them to say they're willing to do that, and also to commit that there is additional investment in pay in both of those years.
Yeah.
So we're very, very cautious about this. We could have been in this position back in December before we started the first strike. Sadly, it has taken a number of days of strike action in order to bring this situation around. But now we're here, we will do our utmost to make sure that we do our best to emerge from the talks with something meaningful for members.
Well, let's just try and help our audience sort of understand what sort of numbers we're talking about here, because I know pay for last year was going to be absolutely critical. Your previous pay offer was a pay rise of up to 9.3% for the lowest earners. Most paramedics would get a rise of at least £1,400. How much more than that are you looking for? And you don't have to be specific, but just to give us a general idea.
So just to clarify, we don't normally have negotiations over pay in the NHS. So pay is kind of imposed after the review body process, and that process last year led to everybody receiving £1,400, with some grades getting slightly more. So as you say, 1,400 was the sum that most people got. And what we've been looking for is a significant improvement to that. In terms of what we'd be looking for, I'd kind of point you to what was proved acceptable to Unison and other unions in Scotland, where agreements were reached to top up those pay scales. I think the minimum pay point in Scotland was increased by £2,205. So those are the that's the sort of sum that we know has been accepted in other contexts. But members will be really wary. This is a government that has refused to enter talks. Unlike governments elsewhere in the UK, we've just been ignored for months and months. So it is going to take, it's going to take a serious set of negotiations in order to bring.
You will also, sorry to interrupt, you will also acknowledge that you are still talking about pay rises well in excess of 10%. Now, we know that there is a lot of public support for strikers, particularly within the NHS, but equally there'll be a lot of people working in the private sector who can only dream of those kinds of pay rises, and there is this question of how sustainable paying for that will be in the future. How much is that do you take on board?
Well, it's interesting to look at what the private sector has done. Private sector is running a lot higher than the public sector in terms of rates of pay. And, almost every month you see different outlets in retail, hospitality, other sectors, responding to the cost of living crisis that we're in by awarding in-year pay increases. I think there was one of the big coffee chains that was the latest to announce a third pay rise for this year very recently. The underlying issue is what pay rates will work to stop people leaving the NHS for better paid and less stressful work elsewhere. And that's what we've got to try and achieve through these negotiations. And, looking at the top up for this year, but also about what we can set, what we can achieve as a pay rate for next year that is going to help with that retention crisis.
Yeah. Understood. And you've said as well, if the government's not serious, you will be forced back into action. How much time do you give it? How do you measure that?
Well, we've got a date that we were holding for the 20th of March. So, you know, we hope that the talks produce a very good outcome, and as swiftly as possible. We will be looking to make sure that we've got confidence in that process before we lift the 20th of March. So, you know, if we get in the room next week and we find that what the government means by additional investment in pay is, you know, it is not going to be a meaningful sum, then, you know, sadly that will be back on, and we'll be on strike on the 15th. On the 20th. But we've got the budget coming up on the 15th. There's an opportunity to put significant investment, not just in the NHS, but the rest of the public sector. So let's see what that brings. We are going into these with our eyes open, but negotiations mean taking a calculated leap of faith. We have had assurances that there is additional funding available and investment in pay. So let's engage with it in good faith, but preserving our strike mandate so that if the talks fall apart, we know that we will have to proceed on an industrial footing.
Thank you very much for your time. Sara Gorton, Head of Health at Unison, on the news that those strikes for the moment have been put on hold. They were due to take place on March the 6th and 8th next week.
Time now is 9:22.